Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is vegetables and flowers grown in containers. Today we're going to look at proper water, fertilizer, pruning, and repotting of containers. And we're also going to give you, or I'm going to give you, some of my favorite selections to grow in containers. So why do you choose containers? There's lots of reasons: flexibility, trendy, changeable, seasonable, fun, instant, easy to manage. Those are all some of the things that I kind of came up with at first. But really, it's an endless possibility. Very instant. You can, put a container together for a last minute party to kind of decorate your patio or your patio or your deck, or lots of different reasons. And the possibilities are completely endless. You can change it out every year. You can make it look different every year. You can make it look different every season. So if you want to, put out some spring stuff, put out some pansies in the spring, you can take those out. You can change it to something in the summer. Let that grow out for a few months. Change it in the fall to something more fallish with some mums and some perennial or some grasses, and then pull all those out and put some evergreen boughs or holly berries or anything in your garden, in your container. So when we talk about containers, you have to remember that plants actually are living, and they do have some basic environmental conditions to survive. They all need light. They're all going to need water. They're going to need the right temperatures, depending on what plant it is. They definitely will need some air movement. A lot of them will need some relative humidity, and especially in containers, you're going to have to definitely look at the fertilization. So we're going to get started, and we're going to kind of talk about what it takes to build a great container. Containers you can choose are endless. You can use any material, almost, any size, any color, but the one thing that you need to make sure is that your container does have some drainage. When you're building a great container, you're going to want to really think about some of those design aspects that we're always talking about in your landscape. You're going to want to apply them to your container, and your container really can do some of those aspects for you. So a container can be a focal point. Do you have, maybe an empty area that you always look out your kitchen window? Well, put a great container out there, and you'll be able to change it out for each season. Look at something different every few months. You could actually take containers and define rooms. Are you living in an apartment area and you have kind of a nosy neighbor? When you're outside in the summertime on your balcony, you could actually take containers. You can fill them with something that's really tall and dense, and you'll be able to knock out that nosy neighbor. You can also grow lots of vegetables in there. So when we're talking about vegetable growing and stuff, a lot of times we're talking about raised beds. Well, raised beds are a container. It's a big container, but it is a container. You need to treat it that way. And don't forget the drain holes. When you're talking about containers, it's really important to make sure that it has a flat bottom so it can sit. If not, then you're going to have to figure out how it's going to sit. And make sure that that hole is in the bottom. That way it is less likely to be overwatered. However, if you do have a porous container, you may need to be overwatering it. Or if it's a non-porous, you may be underwatering it. So a tip that we always get, that I hear a lot of, Terry, I love containers, but I just really don't like putting all that soil in. It gets really expensive. So can I just put rock in the bottom of it for drainage and to help subsidize that soil? Sure, you can. However, rock actually really kind of creates this barrier. So what happens is you put that rock in there, and then you put the soil there. Well, it's got this barrier, and it kind of creates kind of this impervious barrier. So when you're watering, the water actually doesn't go all the way through until it's completely full. So sometimes when you have rock in it, you'll actually drown out your plants. So really, that's really not a good idea. And it also makes your container heavier. So if you do need to move it around some, that gets a little cumbersome. How about trying some wood mulch? Wood mulch is less expensive. Most all gardeners have it. It's really easy to go and purchase just some very inexpensive hardwood mulch. Don't use cypress mulch. And put that in the bottom third of your container. When we talk about containers in a little bit, we're going to talk about recycling the soil and stuff. But if you do, when you do recycle the soil into your compost bin, then you can actually just take that wood mulch and that soil, dump the whole thing in, and not have to worry about picking it out. Some people also use plastic water bottles. I've also seen people use the containers that the plants actually come in to use as filler for the bottom. Yep, you can sure use that, but then you're still pulling those out of your compost bin when you are recycling your soil. A couple other tips is watering. How I get questions on how often do I need to water my containers? Well, I don't know. Depends on if your container is sitting in full sun or part sun, what time of year it is. Is it June or is it August? So really, it's important just to go and check those containers, put your finger down in there, see if it needs any water. I also get another question about the use of those polymers, those little BBs that you can buy that supposedly you put in the soil and they expand and they will help subsidize watering. I've tried those. I really probably would not recommend them for most people. They do go and expand to like 100 times their size, but I didn't really seem like the plant was actually taking up the water that was in those little gel packs. And it seemed to me like I was actually watering it more than normal. Another question I get about building great containers is, can I put perennials in containers? Well, of course you can. You just have to remember that sometimes if you do leave them in the container, they may not survive over the winter. The winter of 2021 so far has been pretty frigid. We've had temperatures down to -25, and that wasn't the wind chill, that was the actual temperature. So sometimes those roots of those perennials are not protected in that container. So, you could have some dieback death of that crown and that root system of that perennial. However, if you do use perennials, a good thing to think about is I'm going to have it in my container all summer long, and then in the fall, when I'm there ready to change out that container for a fall container, I can actually pluck those out and put them in the ground for my landscape. So I have a source for you. This is a good sheet. This is also something that you'll be able to find on your Google Classroom site, but it is a really great chart. So if you're looking at putting vegetables in containers, this is actually going to tell you how big of a container you need, the minimum size, how much spacing you would need for that particular vegetable, and then the depth of that container, the minimum depth of that container for those vegetables. It's got a nice list of vegetables. It's a really great source. So use quality plants. Don't use thrifty plants, ones that you think will, maybe make it, maybe not make it. Use ones that are really good. Make sure that you're checking it all out. Check the root systems and stuff before you buy them. And at the end, in your Google Classroom, I'm going to give you the whole list of my favorite annual flowers that I use in my containers. So stay tuned. When you're starting your container and you start designing, the things that you really need to think about for design are thriller, filler, and spiller. I probably have told everybody that a million times, but that's really what makes a great container look good. So that thriller is that big wow out of the center or the off side to it, depending on how you're designing it. But that's that wow factor. Usually going to be one of the more expensive plants that you purchase. It's going to usually have some pretty tall aspect to it so that it's really going to stand out. Then you're going to do fillers. That's probably going to be the most of the plants that you're going to buy. Those are going to be the ones that fill in that middle part, and they're going to be the colors or the color, if you're going monochromatic, in the center of your container. And then those spillers, those are the ones that are really going to finish off that container. Those are the ones that are going to spill out over the side, really soften the edges of your containers. But not only think thriller, filler, and spiller, also think textures, the arrangements of the plants that you're doing, the colors. Do you want to do hot colors? Do you want to do pastel colors? Do you want to do all the same color? And remember, green is a color, so it's really kind of cool and striking to have a container with all greens and no other color. Really fun to play with. Get lots of textures. Even in this one, you can see that there's some plants that have more of a fine texture to them, plants that have more of a rough texture to them, or a harder texture. And the colors are kind of opposites playing off of each other, but there's little bits of each of the colors within them, so they're really complementing each other too. So when you're looking at the plants and you're thinking about it, think thriller, filler, and spiller, but also think textures, arrangements, and color. But don't forget the soil. So really the soil is really the base of your plant or of your container, and that's where your plants are going to live. You know, when you live, you want to be comfortable, you want to find that favorite couch to sit in. Well, those plants are going to sit in that container all season long. And you want them to be comfortable. So you want to go get good quality media to put in your container. Find a soilless substrate. And these are the words that you're going to be fine. Soilless substrate, media, potting mixes. Find something that's really good. There's lots of different brands out there to choose to find, but look and make sure that you're getting something that is has a soilless mix and it looks good. Something that is probably going to be a little bit more expensive. Don't go out and buy the 99-cent bag from a big box store. That's usually not something that your plants are going to like sitting in all season long. The things that you really want to look at for good quality media is high permeability to water and air, so it's going to be really light. You're going to have some good water holding capacity, so make sure that it's got something that's going to grab that water. A lot of sphagnum moss in it that you can find. It's also going to need drainage, so you want water to stay in it, but you also want to have good drainage. Good aeration. It's going to be lightweight. It's not going to be super heavy. That 99-cent bag, that's going to be super heavy. So if you find that, don't purchase that. Something that's got some maybe fertility in it, and make sure that it says somewhere or that you know that it's probably pasteurized. That makes sure that you don't have any weed seeds in your soil mix. And the one last thing to remember is when you start your container and you first get that soil out of your bag, it's really important to maybe put that in another container and water that. It takes a lot of water to actually get that whole media wet and for it to start that water holding capacity. So it's really wise when you start to actually take it out of the container or out of the bag, put it in a container and wet it and let it sit before you put it back into the container. So while you're watering all of that, you can also go ahead and get your nutrition going for your container and for your media. Recommendations is something that is a slow release, just a 10-10-10 or 12-12-12 fertilizer mix, but a slow release. That way you're kind of having it take care of it all season long. So controlled or slow release, those are the two that you will kind of want to look at. Just a basic, you don't need anything special for that. But again, really helpful when you take it out of the bag, put it into that container to wet it, then you're able to put that slow release in it. Make sure you read the label, and then you're adding the right amount of fertilizer to the container depending on make sure that you put the right amount of fertilizer in according to the size of your container. So read the label. So as the summer progresses, one thing that is really recommended that really helps is to add that liquid fertilizer regime to it. So your plants are new, they're not really stressed, they're happy, they're living in a great space. And when July comes, the thermostat goes up outside and it's super hot. If you're on the eastern side of the state, you're usually going to have a lot more humidity. If the western side, you're not going to have as much humidity. So it's going to be a little bit drier, but it's still going to be hot. So adding that liquid fertilizer regime starting about the 1st of July and doing it every 2 weeks through July and August is really a good idea. That way it kind of helps get those plants through that really hot summer, those hot summer months. Now remember, when you start picking plants, you need to know where that container goes, because you need to have the right plant in the right place depending on what you're doing. You're not going to want to put a full sun plant in the shade and vice versa. So really make sure that you know what you're purchasing and where those plants that you've purchased are going to live for the year. So we pretty much have everything done. You've got all the elements in place. Now it's time to build your container. And one thing that you really want to remember is after that container is built and as the summer goes, go out every time you water and groom your plants. Pull off the spent flowers, pull off the bug-eaten leaves, kind of clean it. That's really going to make your plant look great all summer long. Now you have all the tips. Now you know what to do. You can go start shopping for containers and for plants. And remember, read my plant list to find all my favorite plants recommendations for annual containers. But most of all, have fun. Just go out and experiment. Try something new. Go buy some new plant that you've never seen before, or one that you haven't tried before and you've always wanted to. That's really the best part of containers. So the next thing I want to do is show you just some new ideas of plants for this year. So what's new this year? So the National Garden Bureau comes out with some plants of the year. So they do an annual, a perennial, a bulb crop, an edible plant, and a shrub each year. So for 2021, the year for their edibles is the garden bean. For their shrubs, it is the hardy hibiscus. That's actually one that's really good. Works really well here. Lots of different colors. Those are the ones that have the big, huge kind of saucer plate flowers on them. The bulb crop is the hyacinth. Most of us probably already have those planted in our front yards, and we're anxiously waiting for all this snow to disappear for those to actually start coming up out of the ground. And then for their perennial, it is the Monarda. So lots of different Monardas out there. Some tried and true ones. Great pollinator plant. Something that is really seen a lot in Nebraska landscapes. And then the last one is the sunflower. Think about adding a couple sunflowers to celebrate the year of the sunflower. They're great annuals. There's some that don't get very big and have some really cool flower colors. So maybe try adding a sunflower to your garden. So the Perennial Plant Association also comes out with the Perennial of the Year. So this year is the Calamintha nepeta, subspecies nepeta. This is a pretty cool plant. A couple pictures there for you. It is a little bit of a pollinator. So this is a pretty durable plant. So works pretty well in the garden. But one thing, it's aromatic and it is a great pollinator. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. Plus, it is a little bit deer resistant. So if you're living out in an acreage or something, that's kind of a good thing that some people look for. So it is a zone 5 to 7. So right on the edge. Northern Nebraska, this one may not be all that great for you unless you can find it in a protected area. The blooms from June to September, kind of full sun, dry to medium, not a lot of management to it, good ground cover, and a naturalizer. So if you're in the right area, maybe try picking up this for the Perennial Plant of the Year. Then the International Herb Association comes out with the Herb of the Year. This year it's parsley. Great plant to have in your garden. Using it for culinary purposes, but if you don't get out there and it goes to flower, then it's a great pollinator too. A couple of parsleys out there, you can get the flat leaf or the curly leaf or whatever, but make sure that you pick up a couple parsley plants. They work great for cooking and they are great for pollinators too. And last for new this year, the Backyard Farmer Garden is an All-America Selection display garden. What we do is we display the winners of the All-America Selection trials. These trials have been going on for a lot of years, and breeders send their best of their best to these trial gardens. These trial gardens then plant them out. They have plants where they're comparing them to ones that are already in the trade, and they then judge them according to what they're trialing against. So these are the two new ones. We only actually have two this year for our garden. But we have one edible winner, so that is Squash Goldilocks. This is actually a bushy squash, so if you can kind of get away with putting it into a container if you choose. It does have a little bit of a runner, but it's much more bushy than you would normally think of a squash. The plant only gets to be about 30 inches tall. As you can see, it's an orange fruit, round to oval, and the fruit size is about a 4x4. So a really nice Goldilocks type, perfect size for squash. So try Squash Goldilocks. Should be in the seed catalogs if you can find them. And then the last one that we have for new for Backyard Farmer is the Zinnia Profusion Red Yellow Bicolor. So Profusion is a series and they've been adding to them for several years, but Profusion is actually one of my favorite Zinnia series. And that is also on my list of plants. But they don't get too tall, about a foot to 18 inches. Lots of different colors to choose from, but they don't seem to get powdery mildew like a lot of zinnias do. So a great series if you can find the Zinnia series, any color. There's white and red and pink and purple, and so now that they've come up with a bicolor, so this one looks really nice. Mounded, only 18 to 14 inches tall. It will bloom all summer long, spring, summer, and fall. But one of the things that they commented about is it comes out red and yellow, blooms are array of color as they flower, and as they age, they go from the red and yellow at first, and when they mature, they become kind of an orange and apricot and pink. So that's kind of a fun thing to see. And the blooms are about 2.5 inches in diameter. So that's all about containers. Again, check out my plant list that I'm providing you with this. I wanted to keep the video pretty short, so that's why I'm not running through all of the plant list, because it is a pretty substantial plant list. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Be happy to talk about containers and annuals and vegetables in your containers at any time. Thanks.